Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is just run through a couple of the processes that are available in SoundThread and some of the categories that you might find in the menus and what they mean. And it's worth noting that the Composer's Desktop project has hundreds of available processes, and right now there's a bit less than 50 processes available in SoundThread. And the plan is to include as many processes from the Composer's Desktop project as possible. And with future updates, you will see the number of processes that are available expand. However, not all processes work very well with this node-based system. So it's unlikely, although not impossible, that SoundThread will include everything from the Composer's Desktop project. And if you would really like to use everything that is available in the Composer's Desktop project, I really would recommend getting familiar with Soundloom or Soundshaper. They're really powerful tools. There's an awful lot going on. The goal of SoundThread is really just to make as much as possible accessible to mostly new users, but also old users of the Composer's Desktop project. So let's open up the Explore menu with Control or Command E, depending on whether you're on Windows or Mac, and just have a look at what's going on in here. So this menu lists everything that's currently available in SoundThread. You can open its help file by pressing the question mark or add it to your thread by pressing the plus. Across the top, we have these four tabs. Time domain and frequency domain are where you'll find the bulk of the processes that are available in SoundThread. Utilities, it's just things that I've added. At the moment, there's only notes, but I've got plans to add a few more things that are really just designed to make using SoundThread a bit easier. And then there is also a search window in here where you can search for whatever it is you're looking for. So if I wanted to look for things that are going to time stretch, I could have a look for that. And we see time stretch here, and we could pull that up. We're going to go back to the time domain. This is the kind of way that we generally or usually process audio. So these are the easiest ones to understand. And under the time domain, we have 5 main categories. There is Distort, Extend, Filter, Granulate, and Misc. Distort is my personal favorite category within the Composer's Desktop project. It has things that really nothing else does, because this isn't your conventional harmonic distortion. Instead, this looks to identify wave cycles, which is wherever the waveform has crossed the zero crossing point twice, and then it performs functions on that wave cycle to change its shape in some way, often kind of bringing out related and unrelated frequencies and making really interesting and kind of glitchy processes in the process. So I'm going to have a look at Divide, although all of these are great. I would encourage you to have a little poke around in here. And I'm going to just bring this into my thread. So Divide works by identifying a wave cycle and dividing its frequency. It pitch shifts it down and it replaces the wave cycles that come after it. In many ways, this is kind of like a granular pitch shift. However, unlike a granular pitch shift, it's a lot grimier, a lot grittier. So I'm going to just load up a sound. We're going to choose the piano that we were using earlier. And I'm going to just run this through SoundThread. It sounds like this before processing. And I'll run it while it's playing. And then we'll play this one. And these processes are great for just adding grit in really interesting ways and ways that are hard to do in other software. We're going to just delete this out. You can delete any node or group of nodes by clicking on them and pressing backspace or delete. It's worth noting you can't delete the input or output nodes. Those need to stay there. So the next category that we're going to look at is the Extend category, and these are designed to make your output file longer. Most of them, or pretty much all of them, involve some form of chance that it's going to repeat sections or loop back to sections. These are great for kind of building out textures from existing sounds or adding little interesting glitchy motion into the sounds that you've got. I'm just going to open up Scramble and we're going to load up a different sound file. Let's use these chimes. The chimes sound like this. And then I'm going to just dial in my settings. So scramble cuts out chunks at random from our file as it moves through it. And we're just going to chop this up into lots of little chunks. And then we can set how long we'd like it to be. So I'm going to say I'd like this to be 30 seconds long. And I'm going to use pretty small chunks, I think. Now, with a lot of these processes in Extend, they are using randomness and chance. So if I run this again, I am going to get a different output file. So it can often be worth with these processes running them a couple of times until you get the sound that you're looking for. It's also worth noting that obviously we can combine these together. So we could bring this divide back that we were using for the piano and apply that after scrambling it. The next group of processes is our filters, and there is a kind of more conventional low pass, high pass filter in here, but most of the filters that are currently in SoundThread are filter banks, so something that contains multiple filters, band pass filters tuned to different intervals. I'm going to choose the pitched interval band pass filter bank. This allows me to set a bottom frequency and then a number of semitones, and it will tune multiple filters up until the top frequency that I give it, spaced by those semitones. And so I'm just going to bring that in here, and I'm going to connect this up. Now the filter banks can be very resonant, and so with that they will start to kind of ring and produce pitched material, or at very low settings they'll let most of the original signal through. I'm just going to load up this book here that sounds like this. And we're going to start with the Q very low. It's worth noting you can just click and type into any of these boxes if you'd like to set a specific value. And I'm going to set my lowest band to be 110 hertz, and I'll set my highest band to just be something a bit lower than that. I'm going to go for 7 semitones, so a major fifth, and we're going to leave scatter alone. And with this quite low Q, we're going to get an impression of the pitches, but it's not going to really ring out. If I increase the Q, I'm going to get something that's really resonant and really rings for a long time. So we can really take a sound and just push it in a brand new direction that's quite tuned with these filters. I'm going to go for something like this. The scatter control on all these filters adds an amount of detune to their position. And for something like this that's very, very harmonic, as I push up the scatter, it's going to start to sound maybe a little bit more bell-like. And with a bit more scatter. Now these sounds, these filter banks respond very well to quite short, quite kind of punchy sounds. They will kind of ping the filter, although you can totally run whatever you like through them. And our next kind of category of sounds is processes. It's really good for kind of making these quite short sounds, although it can be used in lots of other ways. And that's our Granulate section. Now these are all based on the same process, they're just set up in different ways. And it ranges from the really quite complex Granulate brassage up to much simpler processes like the pitch shift that just have one control. Now, these are kind of granular synthesis like processes. They cut the sound up into very small grains. And with Brassage, you have complete control over how all those grains are played back, and how many grains there are and how they layer on top of it. And the other set processes in the Granulate group are there to kind of have a lot of that predetermined for you, and you can then just dial in 1 or 2 settings to get a very specific sound. I'm going to just load up the Granulate function. This is really simple. I just have a density, so how much of the sound is going to be played back? How often do we hear some of our sound? And I'm going to connect this up, and we're going to use this synth pad that I have here. So this synth pad sounds like this. And I'm going to set my density fairly low, and I'm going to run this thread. Now, a lot of these processes in the Granulate section respond really well to automation. Like this is really where they come alive. So we're going to start with a very high density and then gradually drop our density down until it's really, really low. In fact, we're going to start coming down a lot sooner than that. Let's ramp like that. Like I said, these processes respond really well with the filter banks in kind of conjunction with each other. So if we take this chimes patch and run this through, it sounds like this. And I'm going to just edit my automation so that it doesn't start quite as dense. In fact, we're going to start very low, get a little bit less dense, and then come back up. That sounds like this. And if I now open up one of our filter banks, and this time I'm going to use the linear filter bank, which spaces the filters out linearly in hertz, and run this through this. They really work nicely together. Finally, we have the Misc category in the time domain, and these are processes that just don't fit neatly into other categories. Some of these are utilities, some of these are quite detailed processes. Stack in particular is a very, very powerful process. Some of these just kind of adjust speed. And what I would say is that when you're looking at some of these, it might not always be clear like why there's just a gain control or why there's something that appends silence. And for these ones, I've already made kind of tips and tricks. So for the gain control, this can be really useful for making like wet dry mixes. I can take the output of my input file, run it through the gain, run it to my output, and mix between the two. And for the append silence, some processes like the filter bank will actually ring out for quite a long time, and if the file ends, then the filter bank will just cut off, but we can just add some silence onto the end of our sound before we do the processing, and now it will add lots of silence on and make sure that we don't lose anything that should be in there. Okay, so the next group of processes that we're going to look at are the frequency domain processes, and these work by performing a fast Fourier transform on the sounds. this moves the sounds from the time domain to the frequency domain. Most sound that we work with in digital audio or analog audio is in what's called the time domain. We track how loud that sound is over time and do that to produce and manipulate our sounds. And this is really useful for lots of processes, but by analysing which frequencies are in a sound at a given point in time, we can perform a lot of manipulations on our sounds that aren't possible in the time domain. Now, to use the frequency domain processes, we have to use these two nodes. They don't have any settings at the moment. Analyze will be getting some settings. And all this does is it converts it from the time domain to the frequency domain for us. And if I take this and run it through, we can see this cable is a different color. If I load a sound in, just go back to the piano, it sounds like this. And if I run this just straight through this, what's going to happen is it's going to take the audio from the time domain. This is going to convert it to the frequency domain. This is going to resynthesize it back into the time domain. And what comes out is going to be basically exactly the same as what came in. But we'll run that and have a quick listen. But if I disconnect this cable and give myself a little bit of space, I can put processes in between here. And of all the processes in CDP, these are the ones that will make often the biggest difference on your sound. I'm going to just load in blur. And what this is going to do is blur frequencies over time. It's going to kind of smear them across the time of the file. For the moment, I'm going to start with the blur fairly low, but we will crank this right up. And if I push this up really far, we're going to smear this sound in a very different way. Now, it's worth noting that you can use time domain and frequency domain processes in the same patch. There's nothing wrong with that. So I could take this pitch shift here and I could split out of my input, pitch shift it down an octave and mix it back into my input and run that. But what you can't do is connect the output of time domain processes to the input of frequency domain processes, or the other way around. I can't take this and connect this in here. The other thing that's worth noting with the frequency domain processes is that you can split the output. So if I take a different frequency domain process, let's just take trace. Where's that gone? There it is. I can take the output from this analyze and run it into this trace, but what I can't do, and it will tell you that you can't do this, is connect that in and mix the two together. If I do want to mix these two signals together, I can just use resynthesize. I can take the output of that and then mix them together in the time domain. that's just a really quick overview of some of the processes in SoundThread. Like I said at the end of the last video, SoundThread is free to download and is available on GitHub, and you will also need to download the Composer's desktop project. The next video is going to have some install instructions for how to install it on Windows, Mac or Linux. And if you'd like to support the project, you can support it on Ko-fi. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.